The rain came down like it had a grudge against the city. Cora Haines stood at the entrance of Brewed Co, a mid-block café on West 47th Street, wringing water from the sleeve of her jacket with one hand and clutching her canvas tote with the other. Behind her, Manhattan roared, horns and puddle-splash and the hiss of bus doors, and ahead of her was warmth, the smell of coffee and every single seat taken. She had been on her feet since 6 in the morning. A double shift at Sal's Diner in Brooklyn, followed by a 2-hour night class in accounting that ended 20 minutes ago. Her shoes were soaked through. Her back was making its feelings known. She had exactly $11 in her wallet, enough for a coffee and something small, and all she needed, all she was asking for, was one chair and 15 minutes of dry air before she caught the subway home. She scanned the café slowly, the way you do when you already know the answer but can't bring yourself to accept it. Couples at corner tables. A group of college students spread across an entire booth like they owned the building. Solo workers hunched behind laptops with headphones the size of satellite dishes. No open seats. Not one. Except, in the very back of the café, tucked into a wide booth that could seat 4, sat a single man. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than Cora's monthly rent. Dark hair, silver at the temples. A jaw that could have been carved from stone. He wasn't looking at a phone or a laptop. He was simply sitting, a cup of black coffee in front of him, watching the room with the quiet, absolute patience of a man who had never once been told no and had never needed to rush. On either side of the booth, not in it but flanking it, stood 2 men in dark coats. Arms at their sides. Eyes scanning. Still as furniture, but the kind of furniture that could break your arm. Cora stared at the empty space across from the man for a solid 4 seconds. Then she walked toward it. This was something people who knew Cora understood about her. She was not afraid of the wrong things. She'd grown up with very little, raised by a single adoptive mother in a small apartment in Pilsen, Chicago, and she had learned early that hesitation cost more than boldness. She was not reckless. She was efficient. She stopped beside the booth and offered the man a tired, polite smile. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you and I know this is a little awkward but everywhere else is full. Would you mind if I sat here? I just need 15 minutes. I'll be completely quiet, I promise." The 2 men in dark coats moved before she finished the sentence. A small shift of weight, a repositioning, but the man at the table raised one hand and they went still again. His eyes, which were a dark, unusual gray, moved to her face slowly. They stayed there. Cora didn't flinch. She was too tired to flinch. Something passed over the man's expression. A flicker of something she couldn't name, not suspicion, not irritation. Something older than both of those things. Something that looked, for just a fraction of a second, like pain. "Sit," he said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to fill a room. Cora sat. She unloaded her tote, pulled out her battered accounting textbook, and ordered a black coffee from the server who appeared almost immediately, far faster than any server had ever appeared for Cora in her life, which she noted and filed away. She cracked open her textbook, clicked her pen, and was 3 lines into her notes before she registered the silence across from her. Not uncomfortable silence. Just, wait. She glanced up. The man was still watching her. Not in a threatening way. In the way someone watches a thing they can't quite believe is in front of them. "Long day?" he asked. The question sounded strange coming from him, like a word spoken in a language he didn't normally use. Cora smiled despite herself. "Double shift in a night class. You." Pause. "Meetings. Sounds boring." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The closest thing to one, maybe. It was. They didn't speak again for the next 12 minutes. Cora drank her coffee and annotated her chapter. The man finished his and didn't order another. When she finally closed her book and began tucking things back into her bag, she looked up and found him watching her again. "Thank you," she said simply. "You didn't have to say yes." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." She pulled on her still damp jacket, gave him a small nod, and walked out of the cafe and back into the rain. She didn't look back. She had a subway to catch. At the booth, the man called Victor Shade sat without moving for a long moment. Then he turned to the larger of the 2 men in dark coats. "Kane." His voice was barely above a murmur. Kane stepped forward. "Sir. Find out everything about that girl. Will Victor discover the truth before Cora does? Don't move, the next will shake you. Subscribe to Nikolai Stories so you don't miss what happens next." Kane Shade had worked for his uncle for 11 years, and in that time he had been asked to do many things. He had tracked down men who owed debts across 4 states. He had made problems disappear before they became headlines. He had, on 2 occasions, negotiated with people who would have preferred to be shooting instead of talking. He had never seen Victor Shade ask about a stranger. Not once. Not ever. So when he placed the thin folder on Victor's desk the following morning, he watched his uncle's face the way you watch a building for signs of fire, carefully from a safe distance, looking for the first sign of smoke. The folder contained what 48 hours of work had produced: the life of Cora Elizabeth Haines, 24 years old. Born March 3 in Cook County, Chicago. Mother listed as Ruth Haines, a licensed practical nurse. Father, unknown. Adoption finalized 4 months after birth. Ruth Haines had died 7 weeks ago from pancreatic cancer, leaving behind a studio apartment in Flatbush, Brooklyn, a modest savings account, and 1 daughter who had moved to New York 3 years earlier to study accounting and who was currently working 2 jobs to pay for it. No criminal record. No known affiliations. No family beyond the woman who had raised her and was now gone. Victor read the file without speaking. He turned the first page. Then the second. Kane watched him reach the line that listed Cora's date of birth. He watched his uncle stop. Victor read the line again. Kane could tell because his eyes didn't move the way they moved when scanning. They stayed still, fixed on a single point, the way eyes do when the brain has encountered something it needs more time to process. March 3. The folder lowered slowly to the desk. Victor's hands, steady hands, hands that had never trembled in any room Kane had ever shared with him, were not entirely steady now. "That'll be all, Kane," he said. Kane left without a word. Alone, Victor Shade sat back in his chair and let 24 years come back to him all at once. Her name had been Nadia Corso. She was 22 years old and laughed at things that weren't funny and burned every meal she ever tried to cook, and was the only person who had ever made Victor feel like the world was something other than a problem to be managed. He had been 26, already deep into work that left permanent marks on a man's soul, and he had told himself, and believed it, that he would get out before anything touched her. He hadn't gotten out in time. Nadia had died on a cold March morning in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and quiet machines, leaving behind a daughter neither of them had planned for and a grief so massive Victor had spent years building a wall around it, brick by brick, until the wall was the most solid thing about him. He had stood in the hallway of that hospital with a newborn wrapped in a yellow blanket and understood, with complete and terrible clarity, that his world was no place for a child. That if anyone ever found out he had a daughter, she would be the weapon they used to destroy him. That the only way to protect her was to disappear from her life so completely that no one, including her, would ever know he existed. He had handed her to Margaret, a nurse he trusted with the only things he had ever truly valued. He had given Margaret enough money to build a life, a name he had chosen, Haines, his mother's maiden name, a quiet thread no one would ever pull, and a sealed envelope he could not bring himself to write until 3 days later, when the words finally came. He had never stopped thinking about her. He had thought about her on March 3, every single year for 24 years. And she had walked into a café and asked to share his table. Victor picked up his phone and made a call he had never expected to make. "I need a DNA test," he said. "Discreet. Fast. The kind that doesn't exist on paper." He paused. "And I need to know where Cora Haines is working tonight." 3 miles south, in a Flatbush apartment that still smelled faintly of Ruth Haines's lavender hand cream, Cora sat cross-legged on the floor of her mother's closet and pulled boxes down from the top shelf one by one. She had been putting this off for 7 weeks. Coming back to the apartment, sorting through what remained of the woman who had given her a life and a name and a home, it felt too final. Like the last page of a book she wasn't ready to close. But the landlord needed the apartment by the end of the month, and Cora was out of time. Most of the boxes were ordinary. Old tax records. Christmas ornaments wrapped in newspaper. A photo album Cora paged through slowly, pressing her thumb to pictures of her younger self at birthday parties, at the lakeshore in Chicago, in front of a Christmas tree that leaned slightly to the left every single year because Ruth never could get the stand right. The last box was smaller than the others. Inside it, beneath a folded piece of cloth, was an envelope. It was cream-colored and sealed, and on the front, in Ruth's careful handwriting, were 4 words. "For Cora. When ready." Cora had seen this envelope once before, when she was 16 and nosing through things she hadn't been invited to explore. Ruth had taken it from her gently and said, "Not yet, baby. When you're older and I'm not here to help you carry it." Cora had forgotten about it or told herself she had, the way you pretend to forget the things that frighten you. She sat with it in her hands for a long time. Then she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in her mother's handwriting, and at the bottom, the last line, The name Ruth had been holding all these years like something fragile and explosive at once. 2 words. Victor Shade. The call came on a Tuesday. Cora was clearing tables during the afternoon lull at Sal's when her manager, a tired man named Greg who communicated primarily in grunts, waved her over to the register and handed her a slip of paper with a phone number on it. "Corporate called," he said, with the energy of someone who had stopped being curious about things a long time ago. "You've been transferred. Midtown location. Start Thursday. Better pay, don't ask me why." Cora looked at the slip of paper. "I didn't apply for a transfer." Greg shrugged. "Corporate doesn't need you to apply. They own the building." She spent the subway ride home trying to make sense of it. The diner was part of the Harbor House restaurant chain. She'd known that, in the abstract, the way you know a fact without thinking about it. What she hadn't known was who owned Harbor House. She looked it up on her phone, 3 stops into the B train, and sat very still when she found the answer. A holdings company called Shade Group LLC. She told herself it was a coincidence. Manhattan was full of people who owned things. It didn't mean anything. She reported to the Midtown location on Thursday. It was called the Harborview, and it was nothing like Sal's diner. White tablecloths. Real candles. A wine list that started at $80 a bottle. The kind of place where people didn't look at the prices because they didn't need to. Cora was assigned to the private dining room on the 2nd floor, a quieter space reserved for regular clients, and within 2 hours of her first shift, she understood that the man who ate in the corner booth every Thursday evening was Victor Shade. He arrived at 7. He always sat in the same seat. He always ordered the same thing, black coffee first, then whatever the kitchen recommended, which the kitchen always knew without being asked. He was always alone except for 2 men who did not sit with him, and he always left at precisely 9. He did not acknowledge Cora on the first Thursday. On the second Thursday, when she set his coffee down, he said, without looking up from the document in his hand, "How's the accounting course?" Cora went still. "How do you know about that?" He turned a page. "I make it my business to know things." She should have been unnerved. She was a little. But there was something in the way he said it, not threatening, not possessive, but almost involuntary, like information he hadn't meant to reveal, that kept her from walking away. "It's fine," she said. "Midterms next week." He nodded once as if filing it away. She walked back to the service station and tried to convince herself this was normal. It wasn't normal. And Kane Shade, leaning against the wall near the entrance with his arms folded, was cataloging every second of it. "She's getting comfortable," he said to Victor in the parking garage after close, his voice low and tight. "That's not good." "She's a waitress doing her job," Victor said. "She walked into your café. She turned up in your restaurant chain. She's young, she's broke, she needs money, she's got every reason to be a plant." Kane stepped in front of him. "Victor. The Harlow family has tried 3 times this year to get someone inside your operation. This has their fingerprints all over it. I ordered a DNA test." Kane stopped. He stared. "You, what?" "The results aren't back yet." Victor walked around him to the car. "Until they are, nobody touches her. Nobody approaches her. Nobody makes her uncomfortable. Do you understand me?" Kane understood the words. He didn't understand his uncle, which was increasingly the more unsettling problem. Things are about to get very dangerous. Make sure you're subscribed to Nicoai's Stories. This story waits for no one. On a Wednesday evening 2 weeks into her new position, Cora arrived for her shift and found a plain envelope sitting on the shelf of her employee locker. No name on the front. Just the envelope. She almost left it. She told herself she would leave it until after her shift. She lasted 4 minutes. Inside was a photograph. Old by the quality of it, the slightly washed-out color of early 2000s film. A newborn baby wrapped in a yellow blanket, held in the arms of a man who was turned slightly away from the camera, his face half in shadow. He was wearing a dark suit. His left hand was visible, cradling the baby's head, and on the ring finger of that hand was a band of dark silver with a square onyx stone. Cora had seen that ring. It was on Victor Shade's hand right now, 2 floors above her. She was still staring at the photograph when she walked out of the staff entrance at the end of her shift and almost walked directly into a woman she had never seen before. "Cora Haines," the woman said. She was black, mid-40s, in a navy coat and the specific kind of flat shoes that suggested she spent a lot of time on her feet in places where heels would be a liability. She held up an ID that read, "Agent Denise Calloway, Federal Bureau of Investigation." "I've been wanting to talk to you," Agent Calloway said, her voice quiet, even. "And I need you to listen carefully before you react." She glanced toward the building behind them. "Stay away from Victor Shade." Cora's heart was hammering. I work here. I know where you work. I know who arranged it. Agent Calloway's eyes were steady, watching Cora the way someone watches a person standing too close to a cliff edge, not alarmed yet but ready to move. There are things about your past you don't know. Things about where you came from. And until you know them, you cannot understand the danger you're walking into every time you go up those stairs. Then tell me, Cora said. Tell me what you know. Pause. Not yet. Not here. Agent Calloway pressed a business card into her hand. When you're ready. And Cora, look up what the Shade family has done to people who got too close. She stepped back. Then decide if you want to keep showing up. She was gone before Cora could ask another question. Cora stood in the cold for a long time, the photograph in one hand and the business card in the other, feeling the edges of something enormous beginning to press through the walls she had built around her ordinary life. She went back upstairs to finish her shift. The envelope arrived on a Friday morning, delivered to Victor's office by a man who did not work for the city, the state, or any laboratory that appeared on any public registry. Victor dismissed everyone from the room before he opened it. The report was 3 pages long. He read the first 2 without blinking. The third page contained a single paragraph, the conclusion, and after he read it, he put the paper down on the desk and sat without moving for a very long time. Based on the provided samples, the probability of a first-degree biological relationship between subject A and subject B is 99.98%. The data is consistent with a parent-child relationship. 24 years of wondering. 24 years of a March 3rd that came around every year like a bruise he pressed on purpose, just to confirm it still hurt. 24 years of a yellow blanket and a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and a decision he had made for all the right reasons and lived with in all the wrong ways. Cora Haines was his daughter. He had known it in the café, in the impossible gut-level way you know the things that matter before your mind has caught up. He had seen Nadia's cheekbones and his own gray eyes and the particular set of stubbornness in her jaw that he recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror every morning for 50 years. He had known, and he had ordered the test anyway because he needed the paper to make it real, needed something he could hold in his hands. Now he held it. And he had no idea what to do with it. He watched her on the Thursday that followed from the doorway of the dining room, longer than he'd allowed himself before. She was moving between tables with the automatic efficiency of someone who had spent years learning to read a room, refilling waters before anyone asked, clearing plates at exactly the right moment, quietly redirecting a difficult customer with a smile that didn't reach her eyes but did the job. She worked like someone who understood that survival required precision. He recognized that quality. He had built an empire on it. He had also, without meaning to, arranged for her to be endangered by it. Kane found him in the garage after close, and for once his nephew didn't speak. He just stood there with his jaw tight and his eyes asking the question. It's confirmed, Victor said. Kane closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, whatever argument he had prepared was gone. He exhaled. Okay, he said. Okay. So what now? Now we keep her safe and figure out how to. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was a number he recognized, and the fact that it was calling at 11:15 on a Thursday night meant only one thing. Talk, he said. The voice on the other end belonged to a man named Griffith, who worked a corner of the Harlow Syndicate's operation that intersected, uncomfortably, with Victor's. Just thought you should know, Griffith said, with the satisfied calm of someone delivering pain they've been saving. Word got around. About the girl. Harlow knows you've got a soft spot. And Harlow's going to use it. The call ended. Victor was already moving. Cora's shift at the Harbor View ended at 10:30. She took the 49th Street exit, pulled her jacket against the November air and turned toward the subway. The block was quiet, a few late pedestrians, a cab sliding past, the distant percussion of a bar 2 streets over. She had her headphones in but wasn't listening to anything. She was thinking about the photograph. About the ring. About a name on a piece of paper that her mother had kept for 24 years and never once spoken aloud. She never heard them coming. 2 men, one on either side, materialized from the narrow gap between buildings with the practiced ease of people who had done this before. A hand closed around her arm. Before she could scream, she was in the back of a car, and the city was sliding away behind tinted glass, and a voice from the front seat said, "Relax. You're not the target. You're the message." They held her in a warehouse in Greenpoint for 4 hours. Nobody heard her. Nobody spoke to her. She was given water she didn't drink and left in a room with a single overhead light while the men waited for whatever they were waiting for. She sat on a folding chair and breathed and did the thing she always did when the world became too large. She broke it into small pieces. What she knew. What she didn't know. What she could control. She was in trouble. That was what she knew. She didn't know that 9 blocks away, Victor Shade had turned the city inside out. She would learn later that he had deployed every arm of his operation in under 20 minutes. More resources, more urgency, more barely contained fury than any of the men who worked for him had ever witnessed in 11 years. She would learn that Kane had found the warehouse through a chain of phone calls that moved like lightning and involved debts called in that Victor had been holding for a decade. She would learn that when the men guarding the door saw who was coming, one of them stepped aside without being asked. The door opened at 2 in the morning. Victor came in alone. He stood in the doorway and looked at her, taking inventory the way you look at something precious you almost lost, and Cora looked back at him and felt the pieces she had been carefully counting begin to tremble in her hands. "You're okay," he said. The words came out rougher than he intended. "I'm okay," she confirmed. Her voice was steadier than she felt. He crossed the room, took off his jacket and put it around her shoulders without asking, and something about the gesture, the automatic protectiveness of it, the way it felt less like something a boss does and more like something a parent does, cracked something open in Cora's chest. "Who are they?" she asked. "The men who took me." "Why am I a message?" She watched his face. "And why do you have a photograph of yourself holding a baby that looks exactly like me?" The room was very quiet. Victor Shade, who had spoken in front of senators and judges and men who wanted to kill him, who had never in his life found the right words too heavy to lift, sat down in the chair across from her. And then he told her, "I'm your father, Cora." The silence that followed was not like other silences. It had mass and weight and heat. Cora felt it press against her from all sides. She thought about the envelope, the name, the photograph, the ring. The way he'd noticed her eyes in the café, she had seen it, the flicker of recognition, and told herself she was imagining things because the alternative was too enormous to hold. She hadn't been imagining anything. The rage came first. Then the grief, for Ruth, for the truth Ruth had carried alone, for 24 years of not knowing. Then something she hadn't expected and couldn't entirely name, something that had no good word in English, the feeling of a question you've been asking your whole life finally being answered, even if the answer breaks you open on its way in. She pressed her hands flat on her knees and breathed. "Get me out of this warehouse," she said at last. "And then we're going to talk. All of it. From the beginning." She looked at him steadily. "And you're going to tell me the truth?" "Yes," Victor Shade said. "I am." The safe house was a brownstone in Carroll Gardens that didn't appear on any lease under Victor Shade's name. It had 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that was better stocked than Cora's apartment, and a security system that she suspected was more serious than anything protecting the mayor. She slept for 6 hours out of sheer physical collapse, and when she woke up the sun was coming through curtains she didn't recognize, and for exactly 4 seconds the world was simple and quiet. Then she remembered everything and the world became complicated again. Victor was in the kitchen. He had made coffee and was standing at the window with his hands wrapped around a mug, looking at the street below with the focused inward expression of a man carrying things he had not yet figured out how to put down. He heard her come in and turned. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Sit down," he said finally. "Please." She sat. He set a mug in front of her and then sat across from her at the small kitchen table, and Cora thought about the first time they had sat across from each other, the cafe, the rain, her textbook, his coffee, and how different that table felt now. "From the beginning," she said. "You promised." He told her. All of it. Nadia, how they had met, who she was, what she had meant to him. The pregnancy they hadn't planned. The kind of work he was doing in those years and the kind of men he was around, and the absolute certainty, standing in that hospital hallway, that bringing a child into it would destroy the child. The nurse named Margaret. The name he had chosen. The envelope he had written and rewritten for 3 days. "I kept tabs," he said. "From a distance. Far enough that no one would connect me to her. I knew when you graduated high school. I knew when you moved to New York." He paused. "I didn't arrange it. That was you." Cora wrapped both hands around her mug. "Did my mother know? Ruth, did she know who you were? She knew your father was someone dangerous and that he loved you enough to know you'd be safer without him." He said it plainly without dressing it up. "She didn't know my name until I sent the envelope. She never told me. She was waiting until she thought you could carry it." Cora looked at him for a long time. There were 100 things she wanted to say, some of them quiet and some of them not. She chose the hard one first. "You made a choice that took everything from me," she said. "A father. A history. My own name. You made that choice for me when I was 4 days old and couldn't say otherwise." She kept her voice level. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter. It matters, he said. He didn't flinch. I'm not asking you to excuse it. I'm asking you to understand that it was the only decision I could see that kept you alive. He looked at his hands. I have been wrong about many things. I have not been wrong about that. Cora absorbed this. The woman who approached me, she said. Agent Calloway. She said I could walk away clean. She watched his face. Is that true? Victor was quiet for a moment. The FBI has been building a case against my operation for 3 years. If you cooperate with them, you become untouchable. They'd protect you. He set his mug down. You could go back to your life. Night classes. Accounting. A future that doesn't involve armed men and warehouse rooms in Greenpoint. What about you? Another silence. Longer. That's not your problem to solve. I'm asking anyway. He looked at her then, really looked at her in the way he'd been mostly avoiding since Carroll Gardens, as if sustained eye contact with her face was something he needed to work up to, because of what he saw there, because of who she looked like and who she was. I've made arrangements, he said carefully. There are parts of what I've built that I can step back from. Transition. Give the FBI enough to close their case without burning everything to the ground. He paused. It won't be nothing. But it'll be enough. Cora thought about Ruth, who had worked double shifts and holiday weekends and never once complained because there was a child who needed feeding and a roof that needed paying for. She thought about secrets kept out of love and the damage they did, even so, the invisible weight of things unspoken. She thought about 24 years of March 3 RDS. I'm not going to cooperate with the FBI to use you, she said. That's not who I am. She stood up, taking her coffee mug with her. But I'm not joining your world either. Whatever that means, I'm not interested in inheriting it. She looked at him steadily. What I want is a father. One who's still breathing. One who's working towards something better than what he's built. She raised an eyebrow. Think you can manage that? Something shifted in Victor Shade's face. Something old and sealed cracked open just slightly, like light under a door. I can try, he said. Good, she said. That's all I'm asking. Agent Denise Calloway sat across from Victor Shade in a conference room in a federal building that was not officially being used for this meeting, and they spent 3 hours negotiating the terms of an arrangement that would never appear in any court filing and would not be discussed outside this room. Victor gave them the Harlow Syndicate, information the FBI had been unable to gather in 4 years of trying, delivered in a leather folder with the kind of specificity that comes from proximity. In return, the Bureau gave him a path. Not a clean one. Not a straight one. But a path. Kane Shade resigned the following week and moved to Portland, where he had an old girlfriend and no outstanding warrants. The Harlow Syndicate was federally indicted 11 days later. On a Thursday evening in December, Cora Haines walked into Brewed Company on West 47th Street. The city had its first snow of the season on the ground and another coming in the forecast, and the café was warm and full of people escaping the cold. She spotted him in the back, the same booth, the same charcoal suit, a cup of black coffee in front of him. No men in dark coats this time. Just a man at a table, looking older than he probably needed to, and quieter than someone who used to run half of New York had any right to be. Every other table was full. Cora walked to the back of the cafe and stopped beside the booth. Mind if I sit? She said. I promise I'll be quiet. Victor looked up at her. And this time, finally, after 50 years of building walls and 24 years of a grief so heavy it had reshaped him, something in his face let go. You've never been quiet a day in your life, he said. Cora sat down across from her father and smiled. And this time she had asked him to share her table. If this story moved you, share it with someone who loves a good twist. More stories like this are waiting for you at Nico Eyes Stories. We'll see you in the next one.